Ready? إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن نبينا محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Welcome back, brothers and sisters, for our Halaqah in Hadith, where we're going through the 40 Hadith collected by Imam Nawawy rahimahullah ta'ala. And today we have reached Hadith number 8. And the Hadith goes as follows. عن ابن عمر رضي الله تعالى عنهما, on the authority of Ibn Umar, the son of Umar bin al-Khattab رضي الله عنهما, may Allah be pleased with both of them, قال, he said, قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم, the messenger of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم, may Allah's peace and blessings be upon him, said, أمرت أن أقاتل الناس حتى يشهدوا أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمدا رسول الله. I have been commanded. In Arabic, whenever a word is phrased like this, it is referred to as sigha majhula. It means that I was commanded, but the one that is commanding me has not been mentioned. And this has many different effects. Sometimes you don't mention something because it is so very well known. If something is so well known, there's no worth in mentioning it. So in this case, the reason why the Prophet ﷺ is not mentioning who it is that is commanding him or giving him instructions, it is because it is well known, both amongst Muslims and non-Muslims. When the Prophet ﷺ is saying, I have been commanded, it is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the Prophet ﷺ is saying, I have been commanded to fight al-uqatil al-nas, to fight people, hatta yashhadu an la ilaha illallah, until they bear witness an la ilaha illallah, that there is none worthy of worship but Allah, wa anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, and that Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is the messenger of Allah. Now some people, they misunderstood this hadith, and they use this hadith to make it seem like Muslims, the Prophet ﷺ, and the Muslims in general are barbaric people or people who love to fight. And that is simply not the case. If you look into history, you will see that Islam spread in many parts of the world without a single fight happening, without any bloodshed, without any battles. Yes, battles were fought, and Islam is a religion that gives you the right to defend yourself, to use the necessary force if a person finds themselves in such a situation. However, at the same time, you will see in places like Malaysia and Indonesia and the southeast part of Asia, it is a Muslim part of the world at the moment. It is populated by Muslims. But how did Islam reach so far? If it started in Mecca and then went to Medina, and it's preliminary, it remained amongst the Arabs in the beginning. How did Islam reach all the way to that part of the world, to one of the furthest corners of the world? And history explains it to us. There was no battles, there was nothing that was fought over. The way that Islam reached that part of the world is through trade. Those early Muslims, especially the Arabs, they were merchants, they were people who used to trade. Even the Prophet ﷺ during his lifetime, he was a businessman in the sense that he would buy and sell things. So these early Muslims would travel to different parts of the world, and they happened to come across the natives, the people indigenous people who lived in that part of the world. And through their transactions and their dealings with such people, they were shown the beauty of Islam. One example that scholars often mention is that what the indigenous people used to do was that they would sell 1 gallon of milk, 1 liter of milk, or some quantity like that. However, they would use half a liter. They would use half a liter of pure milk, and the rest they would fill it with water. So it would be diluted, but they would not tell the people. But the early Muslims, when they would sell the same item, let's say a gallon or a liter of milk, they would sell it full without diluting it with water. And the people, the natives in that part of the world, they would say to the Muslims, if you want to make money, if you really want to make good money, then just do what we do. You will save what you're selling, and you can sell more and make more money. But what was the response of those early Muslims? They said, no, this goes against what our Prophet Muhammad ﷺ has taught us. That we have to be honest in not only in our speech, but also in our actions and dealings with others. So when the people saw this, slowly but surely they adopted, they embraced Islam as a religion, as a way of life. So when we see a hadith like this that shows us the permissibility of fighting for a just cause, it should not be taken out of context and be misunderstood or misinterpreted to mean that Muslims will fight whomever, whenever, wherever. When the Prophet ﷺ is and the companions are helping in the spread of Islam, they do so through diplomatic means. And it is only once those diplomatic means break down that fighting becomes one of those options. However, just because there's permissibility to use that as an option, it does not reflect on the actions of the Muslims. Mecca, which is the birthplace of the Prophet ﷺ, the most holiest of places to any Muslim alive, it was not conquered, but it was opened. In Arabic, we refer to it as Fathu Makkah, as the opening of Makkah. And as history will show us, there were no battles that were fought in order to make Makkah part of the Muslim world. So this basically shows us that even though there is permissibility, there are guidelines, there are certain things that need to be kept in mind. And the Prophet ﷺ here is emphasizing on the importance of these things that he's mentioning. Because the Prophet ﷺ would not fight and would not have been fighting for 23 years for these things if they were just meaningless things. If they were things that you could overlook, then what is the point in fighting? You only fight for something that you truly believe in, that has value, that you cannot compromise on. Because human nature, we go for compromising, right? If you want to live amongst other people, then you have to be able to compromise. If you want to not just live with people as a community, but even on a personal level, if you want to get married or if you are married, in order for that marriage to be happy, then there needs to be compromise. And then you will compromise on certain things that you feel you can compromise on. But then there might be other things that you feel you cannot compromise on. And for many people, and Islam teaches us that the religion is one of those things that cannot be compromised. So the Prophet ﷺ is mentioning the most important thing, which is La ilaha illallah first. And this statement of La ilaha illallah, many people, they've misunderstood it. And they will say La ilaha illallah, it means no one, they say there is no God but Allah. There is no God but Allah. And that gives the meaning and understanding of La ilaha illallah, but not fully. Because if you say there is no God but Allah, then you haven't focused on the most important aspect, which is worship itself. Because if you just ask the question, are there more gods than Allah? If you don't understand the meaning of God, a God does not, especially in the Arabic language, ilah, it does not have to mean someone or something that has power or has authority. Ilah in the Arabic language, it comes from the word of meaning ma'luh, that the thing that is worshipped is referred to as ilah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Allah, and from one of his names is al-ilah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to this in the Quran. He says in Surah Zukhruf, وَهُوَ الَّذِي فِي السَّمَاءِ إِلَهٌ وَفِي الْأَرْضِ إِلَهٌ. And this means He, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is the one who is ilah in the heavens, and He is the ilah on earth. Some people, they misunderstood this verse, and they think it means that there's two ilah, ilah in the heavens and ilah on earth. But the right way of understanding it is the way that the Prophet ﷺ understood it. It means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is ma'luh, He is the one that is worshipped in the heavens, meaning everything that is created in the heavens, they worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And similarly, everything that is created that is on earth, worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, La ilaha illallah, the correct way of translating it and understanding it is to say La ilaha illallah bima'na la ma'buda bihaqqin illallah, that there is none worthy of worship. You have to mention the part of worship in the translation or the explanation of this kalimatul tawheed. And it is sad that many Muslims, they do not understand the significance of this slight change. Whereas someone like Abu Jahl, he would understand it, and this is why he would go against the Prophet ﷺ. When Allah Azza wa Jalla says, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ يَسْتَكْبِرُونَ. And when it is said to them, the Quraysh, the Mushrikeen, that La ilaha illallah yastakbirun, they become full of pride. And they say, وَيَقُولُونَ إِنَّا لَتَارِكُ آلِهَتِنَا لِشَاعِرٍ مَجْنُونَ. They say, should we leave the worship of our aliha just because of a sha'ir, a poet who is majnoon, who is a madman, meaning the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So they understood completely what La ilaha illallah means. It means that once you say La ilaha illallah, there is no room for Lat, Manat, Uzza, Hubal, all these idols that they used to worship. Because when you say La ilaha, you're making yourself distant from anything that people worship. And people don't just worship idols, they worship many different things. Some people, they will worship individuals, like Isa alayhi salam, like Fir'aun, and so on. Other people will worship man-made systems, and they will place their trust in those systems more than they trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Many people today, they worship money. They worship money. They will do anything for money. This is why the Prophet ﷺ, he said, Ta'isa abdul dinar, ta'isa abdul dirham. The Prophet ﷺ referred to these people as abdul dinar and abdul dirham, meaning the slave of dinar, which is gold coins, and abdul dirham, the slave of silver coins. So the Prophet ﷺ is telling us that people can worship and be slaves of other things. Some people have taken their own nafs, their own souls, as God, meaning that they obey, they follow, and that is part of worship. Right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning to us that people have taken many different things as aliha, as gods. This is the word that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses in the Quran. So there are other gods but besides Allah, but do those gods benefit? They do not. Rather, they cause problems and sorrow for the individual. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, وَأَنَّ مُحَمَّدٌ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ, and Muhammad ﷺ being the messenger of Allah. If a person does not believe in that, then they are not Muslim. It is not sufficient to just say La ilaha illallah, but you have to believe in what the Prophet ﷺ came with. When it comes to the Prophet ﷺ, as Muslims, we believe when we say وَأَنَّ مُحَمَّدٌ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ sallallahu alayhi wasallam, the scholars, they say it means tasdiquhu fima akhbar, meaning to believe in that what the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam is telling us. You know, sometimes when you turn on the radio, I know we don't really listen to radios much these days, but let's say you listen to the radio and you hear the commentator speaking about a match that is happening, right? Soccer, basketball, whatever is your favorite sport. And you hear this commentator, the broadcaster, mentioning with great energy and mentioning about what is happening. He's watching the match in front of him, and he says, you know, this person passed to that person and so on, until someone scores a goal, a basket, whatever it might be. And if it's your team that scored the point, then you'll be happy. You might even shout with them, right? And if it is your team that is losing, it will affect you, it will make you sad. Yet you didn't witness anything. You didn't see anything. You only heard. You have belief in that this person that is telling you about what is happening, they have no reason to lie. Why would they lie? What benefit would it bring them? Nothing. None whatsoever. So when it comes to the Prophet ﷺ, our conviction, our belief is even stronger than in other cases. Because not only is the Prophet ﷺ, not only does he not have any reason to lie, but he, before even becoming a prophet, he was Muhammad al-Amin, Muhammad the trustworthy one, and people would trust him. So the first point is tasdiquhu fima akhbar, to believe in what the Prophet ﷺ is informing us about the Jannah, about now, about these kind of things. The second point is ta'atuhu fima amar. Ta'atuhu fima amar, meaning to follow, obey what the Prophet ﷺ is commanding us. And how can you follow in what the Prophet ﷺ is commanding? by knowing, by studying these hadith. What the Prophet ﷺ is commanding is explained in the hadith. So now imagine if someone denies hadith completely, and they say, oh, I don't believe in hadith. How are they going to follow the Prophet ﷺ? So the believers are the ones, when they hear the Prophet ﷺ saying something, they say, سَمِعْنَا وَأَطَعْنَا. We hear and we obey. Whereas other people who do not believe in the Prophet ﷺ, they would say, سَمِعْنَا وَعَصَيْنَا. We hear and we disobey. And then the second point, the next point is وَاجْتِنَابُ مَا نَهَى عَنْهُ وَزَجَرَ, meaning to stay away, far away from the things that the Prophet ﷺ has told us to stay away from. And if a person does not come with following the Prophet ﷺ in this way, then there is a problem with their Iman. There is a problem with their Iman. What did the Prophet ﷺ mention after that? He said, وَيُقِيمُ الصَّلَاةِ, and to establish Salah. In other words, if people do not establish the Salah, the Prophet ﷺ has been ordered, not just being given permission, but he has been ordered to fight such people. And this alone should show a person how important Salah is. But if you're not praying, the Prophet ﷺ is basically saying, I will fight such people because of the importance of Salah. وَيُؤْتُ الزَّكَاةِ, and those who do not give the zakah, I have been commanded to fight such people. And this is exactly what Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu did. After the death of the Prophet ﷺ, many of the Muslims, they actually left Islam. There were many tribes who had just entered Islam, and now after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, they said some of them completely left. Others, they started picking and choosing from the religion, and they said, we will do everything, but the zakat, the money part, we won't pay, because we used to pay to the Prophet ﷺ, and now the Prophet ﷺ is dead, so we are not going to pay that money. And Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, and this shows how intellectual and understanding he was, and how close to the Prophet ﷺ he was, because he is implementing the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet himself is telling us that the ones who deny zakah, the Prophet ﷺ would fight against them. So it is not just that this is in reference to non-Muslims, but even Muslims themselves. And the fact that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned salah and zakah together here, it shows that out of all the actions of the belief, the Prophet ﷺ mentions salah and zakah. He did not mention fasting, he did not mention going for hajj and so on, because those are not as important. They are important, obviously, but not as important as the salah and the zakah. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, فَإِذَا فَعَلُوا ذَلِكَ, and if they do so, meaning that they give the zakah, believe in Allah, pray the salah, and they do the things that are required, عَصَمُوا مِنِّي دِمَاءَهُمْ وَأَمْوَالَهُمْ, that their wealth, their blood, دِمَاءَهُمْ وَأَمْوَالَهُمْ, their blood, meaning their lives, وَأَمْوَالَهُمْ, and their wealth, becomes protected. It becomes protected, meaning that the Prophet ﷺ or anyone else has no authority in fighting such people. So this shows us the hurmatul mu'min and makanatul mu'min. Meaning, if a person is praying, if a person is saying the shahada and coming with the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has explained to us in the Quran and the Hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then such people, it becomes impermissible to harm or take their wealth. And then the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam made an exception. He said, إِلَّا بِحَقِّ الْإِسْلَامِ, except with the haqq the authority or the right of Islam. What does this mean? This exception is important, and it shows us the accountability, that it is not just for a person to say, I am Muslim and therefore I am untouchable. No. If a Muslim makes a mistake, they are held accountable. In an Islamic country, that would be in front of a Muslim judge, and the person would face the consequences for their actions. So let's say a person commits an evil act, right? Then they will be punished for it. In a Muslim society, that person is brought in front of an Islamic court, a judge, and they will be there's a penalty for the evil that the person has done. So this exception, it is important for us to understand that it is not just sufficient to say I am Muslim, but you have to act accordingly to it. The Prophet ﷺ, he once encountered a woman, and this is mentioned in the Hadith, a woman who was caught stealing. And she was about to be punished for that act of stealing. And people tried to intercede on her behalf. Why? Because she came from a higher tribe and she was a noble person. And the Prophet ﷺ, he set the matter straight from the very beginning. And he said, by Allah, if even my own daughter, Fatima bint Muhammad, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, if my daughter Fatima had stolen, then she would face the same consequence. Meaning that in Islam, you don't get to pick and choose. You don't say, oh, this happened to me, so it's a different outcome. It is one and the same. There is no one that is above the law in that sense. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he emphasizes a very important point. He says, وَحِسَابُهُمْ عَلَى اللَّهِ تَعَالَى وَحِسَابُهُمْ عَلَى اللَّهِ تَعَالَى. Meaning that their reckoning lies with Allah. We do what we do in this world, but we never judge the person's akhirah. This is why the scholars in Islam, they often used to say, نحن نحكم بالظواهر والله يتولى السرائر. Meaning that we judge on what is apparent, the information that we have. If it's established that a person committed a mistake, they will face the consequences. But does that mean that the person will go to Jahannam, that the person will go to Jannah? No. There is a story about one of the companions at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, where he committed an evil act and he was punished for it. And when the people were conducting the punishment, some of them started cursing him and swearing at him. And the Prophet ﷺ stopped them and said, this is not the way. This man, because of the tawbah, the repentance that he did, if the Prophet ﷺ was saying, if this tawbah, this repentance, was shared throughout the city, it would have been enough for them. So it means, it shows us that yes, it is possible for people to make mistakes, to fall short, to have shortcomings, and they will face the consequences for that in this world. And in the akhirah, we hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives them. So we do not speak about whether people will be in Jannah or they will be in Jahannam. And this hadith is the highest level of authenticity. It is Rawahu al-Bukhari wa Muslim. Both Bukhari and Muslim have agreed to this hadith. So this is one of the most authentic hadiths that we have. Another word to refer to this hadith, like we explained in the past, it is muttafaqun alayh, meaning it has been agreed upon. So inshallah we will stop here, and if anyone has any questions, we will take those now.